to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. This is part of my old school science fiction book review blog, where I review really, really old school science fiction. I've got tons of it, tons and tons of it. It's kind of a hobby. It's kind of a problem. It's like a hoard, I guess you could say. Yeah, so every time I go into a used bookstore or like a consignment shop or any place like that, I tend to find used books, and I tend to find these really old ones. And what I like to do is I like to read them, obviously, but I like to do a deep dive into kind of the politics behind the book, or like do a new historicist reading of kind of the themes and kind of what the author might have been influenced by at the time period, whether it was like sexist ideology, things like that. So it's kind of, I find it really interesting, and as much as I kind of dive into kind of how women are represented or other things in the book, I really do enjoy reading them. I'm not reading them to like trash them. I just find it really fun to analyze them. Like one of the books that I love the most is called The Fluger. And this book is absolutely terrible to women, but I still love this book. So just that's like a proof of that. I'm not reading these just to kind of like make fun of them. I really do think they have value, and I really enjoy them. Anyway, I'm not going to say that every time I do this. I just figured I'd do it one time. So the one that I read this time was called Big Planet by Jack Vance. It's from 1952. My version is from 1957. So it's a surprisingly engrossing and entertaining classic science fiction where the star of the show is the planet itself. The story is quite simple. A small group of Terrans crash on Big Planet, a world colonized centuries ago by different groups, all of whom have remained isolated from one another and have thus evolved in different ways. So the survivors elect to travel 40,000 miles across the world in search of their original quarry, this man they were trying to track down, and to find a way home. This book honestly surprised me. I thought it was going to be a bit of a slog, you know, given how pre-postmodern the writing is, but it's closer kind of to Star Trek than Forbidden Planet in terms of pace. Did you know that Forbidden Planet is an adaptation of Shakespeare's The Tempest? Random facts. So there's a surprising twist on the part of the female character that started the story as a rather bland, stereotypical, and underdeveloped person. The twist itself didn't exactly come out of nowhere, but I didn't expect Vance to actually carry through with it, so that was surprising. I'm going to talk a bit more about that later in my kind of spoilery section. The other characters are a little boring, rather very boring. Claude, our main man, is very much an unconflicted, kind of typical hero. He's not very deep. He's way too just, meaning that he's boring. He doesn't have any conflicts at all in his brain about what he's doing. And all the other men in the story blend together so much that when they die, I was like, which one was that? I have no idea. It is interesting that Claude, the main character, is a person of color, something that we don't often see in the 1950s, especially under an American publisher. It's obviously not him on the cover because he is like whiter than me and I am like a ghost. So, yeah. The places in the novel don't get enough detail, except for one zone. You know, we're given a thin overview of the society by either another character telling us about it or some omniscient narration explaining it. We also don't spend nearly enough time in any of the locations. Yeah, there are some interesting concepts though. Big Planet has no metal deposits at all. So the colonies have remained somewhat as is in terms of technology. So it's interesting to see kind of how the different groups adapted to this over the centuries and kind of what societies they created based on having no metal. It was kind of fun though because the world's currency was actually metal, so any metal that kind of, I guess, came from the original colonizations or any that somehow get there later, people use that to trade with, and I thought that was kind of an interesting way of creating a like commodity. There was some silly tech and some alien creatures, zip-end goats is what these guys are called on the cover, and a giant pile of burning weed, which I was quite into. Overall, I found it more interesting conceptually than, you know, as a story. It's far too short and the character's rather bland, as I said, but it was fun, and, you know, it had an occasional poetic line, such as, "A spatter of meteorites scratched bright lines down the sky." Anyway, so I'm going to go into a deeper dive now kind of women in the novel, and I'm going to talk about that pile of weed I'm sure you're all interested in hearing about. It's not that exciting. And a couple other things. I don't remember. First, I'm going to talk about the technology. So there's a minor cameo of my favorite random old technology that they always talk about in these books, and that is the Microfiche. This one is a portable Microfiche library. So like an iPad or something full of Microfiche pictures. I don't know. I love that they think that the Microfiche is going to be around, and even now we don't use Microfiche. I used it one time in university, I think, and I'm, you know, like 90 years old. Ion blast, that's their gun. It shoots electricity, so it's a pew pew. Actually, it's more of like a taser, I guess. So Claude makes a joke about being an electrician to someone who didn't know what the gun was, and so he says, electricians carry death in their every gesture. And then he shoots a guy to death with the ion blast. Typical 1950s hero style. But shout out to my husband, who is an actual electrician, but I don't think he, like out Emperor Palpatine's people at work all day. I mean, I don't know what he does all day. He probably just, pulls his wire. What was I talking about? So, given the time period this novel was written in, I assumed I would have had a lot to say about women, and I do. But surprisingly, not all of it is how the novel is absolutely terrible to women and just reinforces stereotypes or regulates women to the background. I'm gonna get the bad stuff out of the way first though, because I always have to mention it. So there's a lot of head patting of grown women like their children. Most of the stuff the men say is still rooted in like a 1950s mentality, like a pretty girl can cause trouble and this march is no place for a girl. There's bound to be friction and inconvenience. Whatever. The story does not pass the Bechdel test. I didn't expect it to. There's a few women, they don't talk to one another. But, the fact that we have more than one woman is shockingly enough to me anyway. So the one woman we do have is Nancy. I can't remember her alien name. She starts off as a nurse, the main character, which is a common thing that they do in these stories. But then she quickly asserts herself by saying that I'm coming with you guys regardless if you say no. And the guys are like, oh, what do we do? But then she confused me because she started becoming kind of hesitant and kind of nervous. And I was like, why is she here? Is she just here to get with Claude? She does end up getting with Claude. And I was like, oh, okay, fine. Is she going to get kidnapped? Ha ha ha. Yeah, she does get kidnapped. But what was more confusing is because she proclaims to be well-traveled and adventurous. So I was like, why? I'm like, is he just totally unable to just characterize this woman properly? He's just like, oh my god, she's just going to say this, but she's going to act completely differently. But no, the reason she's acting this way is because she's actually a secret agent to the bad guy they're trying to track down. Someone even suggested earlier in the story, they're like, what if she's one of his secret agents? And everyone's like, nah. So I actually thought that was very clever. I mean, in today's if this book had been written today, I don't think that would have been much of a twist at all because we would have assumed that kind of thing. But back in this day, when I just assumed that he'd written a poor woman character, it actually did surprise me. So I don't know, Jack. Are you like trying to be a bit feminist? That was interesting. Anyway, probably not. He probably was just like, ooh, this will, no one will expect this. Anyway, I liked Nancy because of that. We have two other women that I really liked, Mata and Wally. There's this part when they threaten these old wizards where it's so Mata and Wally are these two women they find in the desert. They're like young women and they say they're slaves and they want to be enslaved by the guys because they'd rather be slaves than live in their own tribe. Whatever. I'm not going to get into that. That's a lot to unpack. But anyway, the men are like, yeah, I guess you can come along with us. And so, but these ladies are actually quite tough and they actually don't care about the men at all. They're just using them as a way to get to a better place, and as soon as the opportunity arises they just disappear from the story. And I don't think it's because he just let them disappear from the story. I think they just deliberately left because they were like, well, got what we needed, bye. And I was like, I can get behind that. So they these like 17-year-old girls, they come to this kind of castle thing on the edge of a river that has a bridge. They need to cross the river, and the old wizards, or whatever they call them, inside are like, no, you can't cross. So the girls are like, they're afraid. Magickers, come out and lead us to the High Line. There's no response. And then, come out, yelled Mata, or we'll burn down the walls. And the men are like, oh my god. And then the other one's like, come out or we'll give us a welcome, or it's the sword for all within. And then the other one's like, we'll kill the Magickers and slide the town into the river. And they just keep going, and the men don't know what to do. And then, but it works. The wizards get scared and they let them pass. So I was like, good job, little girls. Good job. I guess I shouldn't call 17-year-olds little girls, but when you're an old hag like me, everyone seems young. So that's all I'm going to say about women in the book. I mean, there weren't a lot of them, but they were not bad. Not bad. I'm going to talk about race for just a little bit. So as I mentioned before, Claude, the main character, in the book he's described as dark-skinned. In the cover he is clearly not. This is obviously not him. But given the race relations in the 1950s America, it seemed notable to me that the main character would be, a person of color, and because that really wasn't common. And they're also, given all the other characters are white, it doesn't seem like though Claude's race is a point of tension. Vance was imagining a future where race doesn't matter, kind of like Star Trek imagined, like the original Star Trek. So it was commendable, I think, for the 1950s for him to write that, if not the real type of conversations we need to have about race. I mean, racial violence isn't the solution to racial tensions, but I appreciate that he tried. I thought that was pretty cool. A couple of society things. So the 1950s had all these social experiment ideas about social organization, you know, coming out of World War II. Everyone was like, oh, how can we arrange society differently? It just goes back to the same old crap. But anyway, as we know, the city of Kirstendale is one of these examples. It's a community where everybody works 2 hours, either in the shops, the factories, or as a servant, in order to have 1 hour as a lord. It's a rather impractical idea, like how does that work for children or doctors or some people like that. But it was an interesting concept. I never really come across that concept before in science fiction, so I was like, okay, kind of cool. Okay, and then I'm going to talk one more thing, and this is the big burning pile of weed. So, at one point in the book, really early on, they're hanging out with these soldiers. This part kind of confused me. I wasn't really sure what was going on, to be honest. Maybe I was tired. But they start burning all these shrubs, and it turns out the shrubs are basically just kind of like some kind of a marijuana derivative, and everyone gets high as hell, and then they get attacked by these tribal dudes, and then they have a big battle, and everyone dies except for all the main characters because they're all too high to fight properly. It was hilarious. I was like, what is going on? It doesn't work that way. But, you know, I can appreciate a big weed bonfire. I wasn't sure whether this was a pro-drugs or anti-drugs book. In truth, I don't think he had an agenda. I think he just thought it was funny. There's also a part where Claude is sentenced to death by overdose. So what they do is they take a concentrated version of this Zygage weed, basically, and they inject it into your veins, and then you become like a clairvoyant or like a seer for like 2 minutes, and then you die. But they figure out that because one guy just took regular old multivitamins before the bonfire incident, that multivitamins can counteract the killing power of this like concentrated weed. So he just takes a multivitamin and then he's fine. And then like, okay, too bad that doesn't work in real life. Like, oh my god. So yeah, I don't know how much Jack knows about weed or drugs in general, but it was pretty funny to read about that. So that's basically what my reviews like this are going to be about. I have a whole bunch of other ones, like the Pfluger, like vector analysis, like Rogue Queen, but I made them for another channel, so I might just post them like without notifications or something. Anyway, thanks for listening to that. If you like old school science fiction like this, you can follow my channel, I guess. If you don't like old school science fiction, I don't know why you would watch my videos, but maybe you find me amusing. Maybe you find bouncing noises in the background of videos entertaining. Anyway, thank you.